He gave a long, slow, near-silent whistle, and then looked sharply over his shoulder to make sure nobody from the house had come upstairs behind him and could see what he was about to do. Confident he remained alone and unobserved, he reached out for the item and put it safely away in his large inside jacket pocket. Then he lovingly patted the place over his heart where it lay. For, unless he was very much mistaken, this precious little find was the best bit of luck he'd had for many a year, if not in his whole life. And it was certainly going to make his imminently approaching retirement years far more pleasant than he'd ever previously anticipated. He walked jauntily to the door, leaving the dead girl behind him without a second thought, and stepped out confidently onto the landing. Time, he rather thought, to tackle the man of the house. Chapter 1. Oxford, January 1960. Probationary WPC Trudy Loveday shouted, "Oi! You stop right there! Police!" at the top of her lungs, and took off at a racing sprint. Needless to say, the young lad she'd just seen snatch a woman's handbag as she was standing below the clock face on Carfax Tower did nothing of the kind. She just had time to catch a fleeting impression of a panic-stricken young face as he shot a quick look at her over his shoulder and then took off down the high, like a whippet after a hare. He nearly got run over by a taxi as he crossed the main road at the intersection, but, luckily for Trudy, the traffic that had screeched to a halt to allow him to cross meant she could take advantage of the gap to race across herself in rather more safety. On her face, had she but known it, was a look of sheer joy. Sergeant O'Grady had given her the task of trying to find the man responsible for a spate of bag-snatching in the city centre that had been going on since before the Christmas rush, but this was the first time she'd actually caught sight of her quarry in all that time. Though the thief had been active enough, and the list of outraged complaints from housewives and shoppers had grown steadily longer, neither she nor any of her fellow constables walking the beat had yet been lucky enough to be in the right spot at the right time. Until now. And a month of pounding the freezing pavements, taking statements from enraged or tearful women, and hiding behind shop doors on increasingly aching feet while keeping her eyes peeled for mischief, had left Trudy with a proper grudge against this particular villain, which meant she was in no mood to lose him now. She was aware that many of the people in the streets were watching her race by with open mouths and round, astonished eyes. Some of the men, indeed, looked as if they were going to try and interfere, and she could only hope and pray that they wouldn't. Although they no doubt meant well, the last thing she needed was for some chivalrous middle-aged bank manager to try and stop the fleeing thief for her, only to be roughly tossed to the floor, punched or worse. The paperwork involved in that was something she definitely didn't want to think about, not to mention the look of resigned fury that would cross D.I. Jennings's face when he learned she'd somehow managed to muck up such a simple arrest. Less than a minute of mad chasing had passed so far, and rather belatedly she remembered her whistle and debated whether or not she should use it. At 19, nearly 20, Trudy Loveday still remembered her glory days at the track and field events at her school, where she'd always won cups on sports day for her racing, be it sprinting or cross-country. And she could still run like the wind, even in her neat black shoes and police uniform, with her leather satchel of accoutrement bouncing on her hip. Moreover, she could tell she was gaining ground on the little villain in front of her, who had to deal with the added obstacle of shouldering pedestrians out of his way as he ran, leaving the pavements rather less clogged for her. Her legs and arms were pumping away in that satisfying and remembered rhythm that allowed her to eat up the yard.